At a certain point in your work as a practitioner, something begins to change. And it's not always obvious at first. It's not that you suddenly learn a completely new technique. And it's not that your sessions look dramatically different from the outside, but internally, the way that you are seeing what's happening, that becomes more refined. And that subtle shift is what changes everything about your work. There becomes an expansion as you develop as a practitioner. So there's the early years, and then there's advanced practitioner years. Now, early on, most practitioners are focused on what the client is saying, what questions to ask. We've all been there. What technique to use, where to guide the session next. There's a lot of doing, a lot of thinking, a lot of trying to get it right. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of the learning process. But at a certain point, you begin to realize something, that the session is not determined by your technique. It's determined by the state of the system that is in front of you. When I say system, I'm not just talking about the nervous system in a clinical way. I'm talking about how the body is responding, how present the client is, whether they are actually with themselves or whether they are compensating. Because a client can sound very aware and not be connected at all. There was a client that I was working with at one point who they could explain everything. They knew their patterns, they knew their triggers. They could even tell me exactly what they should be doing differently. And if I had stayed focused on their words, I would have thought, this is a very aware client. This is good work. But something didn't feel aligned because as they were speaking, their body was tight, their breath was shallow. There was no real presence behind what they were saying. And you know what I'm talking about. These are people that your clients who are just reciting what they've learned. It's very different than feeling. Anyway, that's when it became clear that they weren't actually processing, they were performing. And we call that performing awareness. So let's expand our insight here. And this is something that advanced practitioners begin to recognize. There is a difference between knowing and being with the experience. And those two things can look very similar until you learn how to see the difference. And I know if you're being really honest with yourself, you have probably seen this. The clients who say all the right things, they understand everything and they can walk you through their entire pattern, but nothing changes. And that's usually the moment where practitioners start to feel like something's missing here. So, what begins to change at a more advanced level is your attention. You're no longer listening to the story, you're tracking breath, whether they're holding or whether their breath is flowing, their pace as they're speaking. Are they rushed or are they grounded? Their eye contact, are they present with you or are they disconnected? Body tension, shifts in energy, and these subtle cues tell you far more than the words ever will. In all of the teaching that I've done in over the last 26 years, I've always taught this one concept. When a client comes in and they are speaking, we are not actually listening to the words. We're experiencing or feeling the energy behind the words. So when we talk about energy, it also relates to the nervous system. So let me share another client story with you that I'm sure you'll be able to relate. I had another client who would start sessions very grounded. They appeared to be very present, very connected. And then as we moved towards something more vulnerable, there would be a shift. Not dramatic, but noticeable. And they would begin to speak faster, move into explanation, or just lose connection with their body. And if you weren't watching for it, you would miss it completely. But that shift was the moment that mattered. It's not the story, not the insight, it's the shift. Because that moment, that's the moment that tells you that the system is moving out of openness and it's moving into protection. And I'll often call that moving into shutdown. And if you continue forward without actually recognizing this, you're no longer working with the system, you're working against it. So, what that means is you may be doing more harm than good. So, the work becomes less about what do I do next and more about what is happening right now. And that question will change everything about the way that you work. So here's something that you can begin to do immediately in all of your sessions, especially in your next session, because the more you practice, the more you can't miss this. So first, just slow yourself down. And instead of focusing on what the client is saying, ask yourself this: are they present right now? Is their body engaged? Is their system open? Or are they compensating? And just sit with that. You don't even have to change anything yet. Just start seeing it. Because once you begin to see it at this level, you can't go back and just follow the story. You begin to recognize that the story is not the work, that their system is the work. And this is also where sessions can feel very different. They're less active, they're less structured, and they can seem less busy, but they become much more precise because you're no longer trying to move the session forward. You're allowing the system to show you where to go. Now, this is one of the first real shifts into advanced practitioner work. Not doing more, not adding more technique, but seeing more and responding to what's actually happening. So instead of looking at what's on the surface, you begin to look at what's happening at the deeper level of their entire state. Now, this is something that I go deeper into in my book, Survival to Coherence. And it is the core part of training in all of my courses. But there are a couple courses that are very specific to this. And one of them is called the Coherence Method. It is a course that I designed after many years of working with clients, with teaching, and seeing clients on retreats. It is a game changer. I'll leave that link down below if it resonates with you.